Hello. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The first thing I want to say is thank you all so much for making this quilt block for me. I'm very excited to be getting this quilt put together, and I want to include as many friends and family as I can in the finished product. So when you receive your packet, you will be getting a paper with instructions and either 2 stacks of white squares. One stack is slightly smaller, one stack is slightly larger, or 1 piece of uncut white fabric. If you're receiving the uncut white fabric, it's because I know you're a quilter and you have the rotary cutters and tools to do this on your own. I will be giving 2 separate kinds of instructions here. I will start with the instructions for rotary cutting and piecing, and then I will go into a more detailed explanation for those of you who don't make quilts regularly. I will show you how to use these little squares and add in 8 squares of your own fabric and create this beautiful Lemoyne star. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do when you receive your packet, there is a piece of fabric inside. You will want to give it a quick press to get any of the mailing wrinkles out of it. Make sure it's nice and smooth. Then you will be cutting, and this project uses half square triangles. So what you will do with this white fabric is you're going to be cutting 4 3.5 inch squares and 4 3 7/8 inch squares. The 3 7/8 inch is just not quite 4 inches. It's one little tick shy of 4 inches. And those blocks will be, those squares will be what we end up making our half square triangles out of. Actually, I'm gonna swap that and I will start cutting with this little square that I have. I'm lining this up and cutting a little strip that is just shy of 4 inches. And then I'm going to turn it, and this side is not exactly square. So I'm going to go over here, actually I'm going to turn it, and this side is square. So I'm going to now take my ruler, and if you'll see, I have it lined up almost to the 4 inch mark on both sides. And I will cut that. And I will do 4 just like that. Then we will take the colored fabric, and you're gonna need 8 different colors of fabric, and you can use fabric from scraps from other projects you've made. The request that I have is that we use spring colors, things you might see at Easter time. I prefer to stay away from bold primary colors, so anything that looks floral, like pinks and greens and blues and purples and all those fun colors. So I'm just continuing to cut 3 7/8, which is not quite 4. So when we have our squares all cut, then we can make the half square triangles. And to do that, you want to line up your ruler with the tip of 2 corners. See how that makes 2 triangles? So when I line my ruler up, I don't put the edge of the ruler right on the tip of the corner because that's where I want my cutter to go. So I just line it up just shy of that edge and hold my ruler down and cut across. And looky there, that gives us 2 triangles that when we place them together become the diamond. So you will do this with all 8 of your colors, and you will also do this with the larger squares. Your 3.5 inch white squares are going to stay squares. See how I'm lining that up just shy of that point. And then when I cut across, there you go. Now I'm going to jump to what to do if you don't have a rotary cutting mat. So if you don't have a rotary cutting mat and you haven't sewn quilt blocks before, this is also simple, quick and easy. What you will get are a stack of white squares. So when you look, one set of 4 squares is going to be slightly bigger than the other set. So take the smaller set and just place it aside. That's your corner blocks. Those are going to stay 3.5 inches. So just set those aside. Now you have these almost 4-inch little white blocks, but you also need the same thing out of your colored fabrics. So what I suggest, you can do a couple things. You can take one of these white squares and a piece of fabric that you want to use, and you can trace around it and cut it out. But what I thought would be a good idea is to make yourself a little template. So you have here one of the bigger white squares. You can take any piece of cardboard, a cereal box, a piece of mail you have laying around, and you want to trace this. So line up 2 of the sides with the corner, because you know that's a square corner, and then use a ruler or a straight edge, anything you have around the house, and line it up on the edge of the fabric, and then make a little line. Line it up and make sure you got it right. I got a little on the outside edge, so I'll trim that up when I cut it, and do the same thing down here. See how you line that up? Draw a line. And then you can cut this out with your scissors, and you have a little template. So now that you have your template, you're going to take your fabric and trace around it. If you have charm squares, or sometimes at the fabric store you can get little bits of fabric cut into pre-cut squares, if you know it's already a square, line up 2 of the corners. If you don't, if it's odd shapes, you can just trace around the whole thing. You can use a pencil for this. If you don't have a chalk marker, anything you have around the house will work. Try not to use something that is going to, like a Sharpie, might bleed into your fabric. You don't want that. Anything you have around the house that will mark on the fabric. I find that a graphite pencil works really well. Just a regular number 2 pencil works very well for tracing. Then you want to cut out this little square, just as neat and tidy as you can, but don't stress it. This is a labor of love, and whatever happens, happens. So once you get all of your colored squares cut out, you will have 4 white squares and 8 white squares and 8 colored squares. And the next thing we're going to do is turn these squares into triangles. So just like we did with the rotary cutter, we're going to take any ruler that you have. If you don't have a ruler, find something with a really sharp straight edge. And you want to put your square down on a hard surface as turned as a diamond. And then you want to go from one corner of the diamond to the other. And you, instead of using your rotary cutter here, you're just going to use a pencil or a chalk marker, anything you have around, whatever you use to cut out your squares and trace them. You're going to draw a little line from one corner to the other. When you do your white, you're obviously going to want something like a pencil or a colored pencil to draw that line. Then, just like you did with the square, you're going to cut that center line, and you have 2 triangles. Now, when you get all of your triangles cut, all of your white squares turned into triangles, you are going to lay out your block. And to do this, I like to look at the paper as I'm doing it, because that tells me how my triangles are going to line up. So I'll start at the top here and line up my triangles. So for each color, you're making this diamond shape. So this tells you where you're going to place each of the fabrics as you sew along. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be piecing the triangles into squares, and then the squares into rows, and then the rows into a block. And if you can tell, I'm following along with my picture here. To see just where everything needs to be placed. There we go. And we'll put our little green in here. Now, we need our triangles. We go in and put our white triangles matching up to each of the colors. So the next step I want to do is I want to put these two pieces together to create a little square. So I'm going to line them up carefully, and then I'm going to bring them over to my sewing machine, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam. And oftentimes in quilting circles, you'll hear people say a scant 1/4 inch seam, which means I'm not going to sew, let me get a ruler here. So when you look here at where the 1/4 inch line is, you don't want to sew on the far side of a 1/4 inch. You want to sew on the inside of that 1/4 inch. And there's a few ways to help yourself when you're trying to sew a 1/4 inch seam. When you look at your presser foot, there are some little, every presser foot is different, but you can kind of see, like for me, I have a little line right here. And what you can do is line up the center of your presser foot and then take a look and see. For me, the 1/4 inch line is right there. So when I go to feed this into the sewing machine, I'm going to keep the edge of my fabric lined up with that point on the presser foot as it feeds in. That's one way you can do it. Another way that I like to do it, if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot or a guide on your machine that shows you a 1/4 inch, is I like to just use the ruler, measure your 1/4 inch, look right here, there's a 1/4 inch, and go down a little bit so you keep a nice straight line. There's a 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to draw a line right here, and that gives me a line to follow as I sew that together. So I bring it over to the machine, and when you're piecing a quilt together, you don't need to back up to secure your stitches like you do for regular sewing, because as you sew the blocks together, they are going to hold the stitches in. So no backing up necessary. Use a straight stitch and right along that edge, 1/4 inch seam. Now, I'm going to slide over my little layout because it's time to iron. You can wait till you get all your colors attached to the whites to make your squares. Look at that nice little square. But we want to press the colored fabric towards the colored fabric so that it doesn't show under the white when we go to put the quilt together. So just want to press that down nice and even. Turn it over, give it a little press, and you have made your first square. So I'm going to put a bunch of these together and then come back and show you the next step.